So thank you, and once again, welcome for being here today and joining OLLI for the Brown Bag presentation, Challenges and Opportunities for Housing and Homeless Services During COVID. Thank you to the Friends of OLLI whose support makes these weekly Brown Bag presentations possible. And once again, I want to just remind you all that we have some information and an opportunity for community archive project to participate. It's the goal of this project is to create an archive of material that will be publicly available to researchers at HSU in the future. The project coordinators are looking for people who would like to participate or volunteer to help with contacting people and getting oral histories. And in a little bit, I'll put the link in the chat. So before we get started, if you haven't already, please mute yourself and keep yourself muted unless you have a question. And the presenters do welcome questions throughout the presentation, much more conversation style. So feel free to ask questions as we go. Thank you again. And I will go ahead and turn the introductions over to Jane so that she can share who is here today.
Welcome everyone on this lovely Monday sunny morning. And we're also happy to welcome Dr. Darlene Spoor and Dr. Angelee Browning to our Monday morning brown bag lunches. We need to maybe name them something else. I don't know. I don't see too many people eating lunch during this. Darlene has been the executive director at Arcata House Partnership since 2016. Her leadership has allowed the partnership to continue to serve people with a variety of needs: mental health issues, learning disabilities, substance use concerns, special education needs, people who were economically disadvantaged or housing insecure, people with physical challenges, people fleeing domestic violence, and the development of affordable housing. She's committed to serve the community and its most vulnerable citizens. And Darlene will go ahead and introduce Anjali.
I will. Hi, welcome, and thanks for allowing us to join you today for this lunch brown bag lunch. This is Dr. Angelee Browning. She's been with our Arcata House Partnership for 3 years now, and she is instrumental in making sure that all of our client services needs are met. She's the manager of client services, and she has, over the last year with COVID particularly, really been very forward thinking in preparing and rolling out some pretty impressive programs to serve people in need. And we're going to share a lot of that information with you today. So thank you for joining me, Anjali. I'm very happy to be here. We have a lot of information to share, but we welcome comments and questions as we move forward because we want to make this interactive. The information, we'll try to keep the information as exciting as possible. And for me, it's always very exciting to be able to share with you the amazing work that our staff do. And let me say that what we're going to share with you today has all been done with 29 staff or less over the last year. And it's been a real challenge for us. I think the biggest challenge, like anybody else, is that initially, staff were in and staff were out, and we had to redo all of our programs and processes. So Angelee and I are just going to spend some time interacting with each other. It's going to be a little tag team effort. We work well together, and I'm so happy to have her on our team. We want to talk today about challenges, first of all, and then some opportunities for housing and homeless services during COVID. A lot of what we'll talk about is specific to Arcata House Partnership, but some will be also specific to the county. As you know, or don't know, Angelee and I both serve on countywide agency. We represent the agency on countywide committees. So we also work to make sure that more people don't become homeless. We work to make sure that we're working with agencies across the county to serve the people that we serve. And our partnerships really include about 220 agencies countywide. And so we're going to talk throughout this a little about, here's what Arcata House Partnership has experienced, but it also here's some of the things that have been happening countywide. So some of the challenges that people who were homeless have been experiencing over the last year really have been that last year in March, people were told to shelter in place. And there were thousands of people in our county who had no place to shelter in place. And so we and other homeless service agencies across the county were tasked with figuring out how we could help people shelter in place. And so I think that what we had to do was to look at what was happening during that time. So not only did people not have a place to shelter in place, and please feel free to jump in, but suddenly they didn't have access to resources they used to have access to. They couldn't go into the library to get warm or to use the bathroom. They couldn't come into our building to shower. There were no public restrooms open. There was no income from panhandling because there was nobody on the street to give money to people on street corners who needed that money so that they could buy food. So suddenly a lot of the services and opportunities that people had just went away in a day. There was no time to plan. There was no time to figure out how we were going to help people with such limited access. They didn't have access to safety protocols like masks and hand washing stations, like, again, public bathrooms. It was really a lot harder for all of us to access medical services. So imagine how difficult it was for people who were homeless to access medical services, which all of these things led then to a real increased risk for people who were homeless, or so we thought. That's the impression that we were going with initially. We had to, just like all of the other shelters in the county, reduce the number of beds that we provided in our shelters because there was no more congregate sheltering. So we reduced our numbers by 60%. Betty Chin reduced her numbers. The mission reduced their numbers. All of this meant there were less resources, right? It was different in the beginning of the pandemic, where nobody knew what was happening. We didn't know who was the most at risk, so we assumed that people on the street were most at risk. What we did find out a few months in is that some research out of the CDC had shown that people who were living on the street actually had less risk because they were in the open, they were in public. It was less risky for them to be on the street as long as we could manage the weather and help them to survive the weather than to be in a congregate shelter. So we moved forward under that assumption that it was better for people to either have their own room to be in or to be on the street. And so we would help them to figure out how to live on the street. But in the meantime, we were looking at all kinds of options. What could we do to quickly help people have a place to be? And I think the one place that we really moved the quickest is our emergency tent shelter program. And some of you saw those 2 parking lots that the city allowed us to use. So the city of Arcata, the only entity in Humboldt County who said, let's figure out a way to be creative. And what can you do if there's 2 parking lots available? And so,
Judith?
and so what happened was, I turned to Anjali and said, Anjali, how can you pull a miracle out of your hat? How can we start a program from zero, nothing that we've ever done before, not knowing what was happening with COVID, how we were going to get staff to fund anything, how we were going to get funding to do anything. And here's 2 empty parking lots. Figure it out.
Well, I think there was a lot that came from Darlene's planning as well. Certainly it was a group effort, and there was a tremendous amount of cooperation with other agencies that made it happen, particularly the City of Arcata and the police department. They were very helpful in their initial rollout. But yeah, we essentially had to design a completely different program on the fly. We had to get staff, and it was very quickly recognized that we needed 24-hour staff on site to manage, you know, many different aspects of the program. One is to do service delivery on site. Another is to keep everyone safe, because certainly we had a lot of people coming from off the lots. We had very few problems with people actually who were staying on the lots, but it was people coming from off the lots, and that made it very difficult for them to be there. And so it was very staff intensive that way. And so finding staff, you know, people who wanted to do public facing work at that time was very difficult. Very few people wanted to do that form of work. We also had less volunteers to pull from, right? Because we couldn't even bring in volunteers. And so there were just a tremendous amount of challenges there. And then just the basic, you know, how are we going to do all this, right? We needed to get porta potties, we got portable showers, we got, you know, we needed to do 3 meals a day, the food service. We needed to do, need to figure out all kinds of other details. You know, just what are the rules going to look like for being here? What are the expectations? What are we going to try to do with people once they're here, right? We have in our shelter programs and our permanent shelters, you know, we have a very clear program in place, but this one was really not at all clear beyond just get people safe, right? But once we've got everybody there, this is a great opportunity to now start delivering services and figure out some options. So in the end, we delivered a tremendous amount of service. We served about 97 people through the tent shelter program. And this was also being done in conjunction. At the same time, we were also running the hotel emergency shelters funded by the governor. So we had two completely new projects that all demanded new staffing and new services in the middle of also trying to restructure all of our existing programs to comply with all of the new safety standards. And, you know, massive challenges like how do we even get enough PPE gear, right? Because there was none to be had. And, you know, even doing like the homemade masks, well, that's pretty challenging for people on the street because those need to be washed all the time. Where are they going to wash them, right? And we very quickly realized we needed laundry services and we needed, you know, all of these different things to try to help people be safe. There were shortages of sanitizer as well, as many of you remember, right? Or even just try to get some toilet paper. Right. So, you know, as Darlene pointed out, early on in the pandemic was quite different than later, but, you know, it was a really big challenge. But we served about, the 10 shelters alone, we served 97 people. We had not one exposure to COVID, so that was number one success, right? No COVID exposures. We managed to keep people safe. We did transition a number of people to our other programs. So in the end, about 6 people off of that program did get permanent housing, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to 97, except when you understand how long it typically takes to stabilize people and that this was a pretty short program. So we still see that as a very big success. But in the meantime, we also served 3 meals a day, right? So in the end, I think do we have our meal count here? I think it was
10,197 meals were provided to people during that time. And the numbers are staggering. 3,539 bed nights just in the emergency tent shelter were provided, which is just unheard of. I mean, a program from from zero to there was amazing. So Anjali, you did an amazing job. In addition though, you had to coordinate first hiring staff and coordinating, writing rules, right? The equivalent of building the plane as we were flying it is how it was referred to. Making sure that people got connected to medical care or to mental health services, and how difficult was it when all of the public offices were closed, but we still had people who needed service. We still had people who needed IDs, or people who needed medical care, or people who needed to be connected with substance use programs. So all of that had to happen in the blink of an eye. So I want a big, huge kudos to you, Anjali, because that was really impressive. In addition, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I was just going to build on the lack of services. You know, there were challenges that people would not have really thought of. Things like probation was not making visits out to, you know, to anyone. They weren't doing any field visits. And so it meant that many people who had support systems built within that, you know, for, you know, as conditions of their parole or other kinds of things. And so many people who had been pretty stable were now becoming very unstable, right? And they were having a lot of difficulty being anywhere. But there were also increasingly less repercussions for anyone else, right? Whether it was our clients or not. So people weren't getting taken to jail, right? Or they were being held in jail. So there was very little accountability for actions. And it meant that anyone who was homeless was at much higher risk for harm, right? Because police protect them too, right? And so this was actually a very big and sort of unexpected challenge that arose out of COVID.
Right, and I think it's important to know when we're talking about police support, again, we had only 2 major incidents on our emergency tent lots where the police had to be involved. But there were dozens of incidents around our tent lots from people outside the program who were trying to bully people into getting their tents, trying to force people to do things that they were not comfortable doing, trying to come onto the tent lots to steal things that were there, because we provided people with tents and cots and sleeping bags and food and other things. So there was a lot of opportunity, I think, for people, had we not provided 24-hour shelter, for people to have been taken advantage of. And our staff worked really closely with Arcata Police Department to make sure that the people inside of this emergency tent shelter program were kept as safe as possible. In addition, at the same time, we started up a governor mandated project Room Key, which opened up some hotel rooms, or allowed us to rent some hotel rooms, so that people who were at greater risk of COVID, over 65 with substantial medical issues, could have a room where our staff would support them. We were supporting the economy of Arcata by providing this service, and we provided 5,969 bed nights in 2020 for people who were at severe risk. This is all in addition to, we were still running all of our other programs. We still had our family shelter and our adult shelter. We're still feeding people the way that we feed people. We were still doing case management. We were still providing supportive housing, and is what it felt like to me. Our staff were quickly scurrying to try to find ways to serve people the best we could. And so once again, I turned to Anjali and I said, here's Project Room Key. How can we serve people in the best way possible? And here's how it went.
Well, yeah, and I have to mention one very dedicated volunteer, Johnny Hawkins, who really very much helped get that program up off the ground, because we were stretched so thin with all of our staff. So I do want to really acknowledge his involvement. He was very instrumental when we were first trying to, you know, screen people to bring them in and get them settled, and while we were still trying to get more staff on site. And so that program was very, very different from the tent shelter program, and it's still operating. You know, it had the advantage of everybody having their own rooms, but it also came with lots of challenges as well, right? Many of the people that were going into the hotels were people that were particularly hard to serve because they had very complex medical issues, or, you know, had been on the street for a very long time, which was part of what made them so vulnerable. But it meant that they also had, you know, very little documentation in place, right? So even though we may want to try to get somebody housed, it takes a very long time to get all those things in place. So it's a very long process to get them stable. But, you know, it actually has been a very stable program. The retention rate has been quite high, and I think, you know, because of the fact that it's pretty nice to have a room in a hotel, and the hotel has been very helpful in that process as well. But again, you know, coming up with a whole new program, right, of what are the rules, what are the expectations, what allows you to stay or not. And one of the really big challenges for all of our programs is, you know, cutting people off from their social ties, right? Particularly, I mean, social ties are important for all of us, whether it's family or friends, or, you know, all of those people that we rely on, particularly in difficult times. But, you know, for people on the street, those supports are really essential to make it do when you don't have enough, right? And so, you know, many people need, you know, because they were sort of cut off from other things, maybe they wanted to let somebody use their room for the night in exchange for something else that they needed, right? This is a very natural kind of give and take that happens, but that can't happen under this program. And so helping people to understand, well, we know that would be a nice thing to do, but we can't. The purpose of this program is to shelter in place. And so sheltering in place, no matter where it was one of the most difficult challenges that we faced, because it's a very hard thing for any of us to do. And particularly, like I said, for people who are so dependent on those social ties to make ends meet, to get by each day, to stay safe, right? Because they don't know, when is this program going to end? It's not like they can just cut all of that off and then all of a sudden maybe they're going to be on the street, and, you know, nobody knew how long the program was going to last. And, you know, so those favors are very important to maintain. And again, if you don't have enough income, then you make do in other ways. So, you know.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat that said, an amazing project, the tent lot. Why did it end after 3 months? It was a pilot program that we were very fortunate to be part of. The city of Arcata agreed to let us try it there, and we found some funding for a few months. It ended when there was a thought that businesses were going to start opening more, and that they were going to need the parking areas for their people, for the customers. And that's and we started to open businesses a little bit, but then they quickly closed. I think for us, the important thing is that we showed that this was a program that could happen, that there were a lot of lessons that we learned for both programs, right? Both the tent program, the emergency tent shelter program, and the emergency project room key program. But they are very expensive, much more expensive than running our shelter programs, which provides, you know, a place for people to be. In hotels, right, people rightfully so spend $75, $90 a night just for the room. Our shelters don't cost that. We run our programs at a much lower rate than that. And so what we do know is that it's much more cost effective to run shelter programs, and in shelters that we own and manage. Now with that, we also know that congregate sheltering is not going to be the way of the future anymore. So we, at the same time as we were doing all of this, we were writing new procedures because we had to implement new PPE and safety protocols. We had to suspend our services for some programs because staff were out and working from a distance. We had lockdowns that didn't work, right? People didn't want to be in the tent program and not be able to go to the grocery store, even though we were trying to help people shelter in place. That was hard for all of us, right? Lots of people had mental health concerns that really got exacerbated. Not just the clients we serve, but our volunteers, our staff. We were all dealing with this new thing that felt bigger than we could imagine. It felt unsafe for everybody, and we were all just trying to be safe and do the best we could.
Sorry, I just wanted to circle back on the tent shelters, and one of the important things that was early on considered when it was even being considered to do that program is the concern that it could become sort of a entrenched encampment, right? That people were worried about, like a Palco Marsh kind of situation. And so part of what we worked very hard to do was to set up program expectations early on that sort of circumvented that happening. And so part of the plan was we were starting with 2 lots. We would work to get people services, try to help resolve what we could for people so that they could potentially stabilize earlier, but that eventually they would consolidate down to 1 lot. And then because we also had to at the same time shut down our shelters, our permanent shelter sites, we didn't shut them down. What we did was we put them on lockdown so that people really couldn't come and go, so we could keep everyone in there safe. We worked on getting everyone there housed and then transitioned everybody that was remaining on the lots into the shelters. And we did all of it without incident, and people cooperated because they understood the expectations early on. Everybody was agreeing to be in a program, right? And so that's the difference between a managed site, right, where we could manage a lot of the day-to-day behaviors, but also manage the expectations and the time frames. And so I think that was really essential to a smooth transition. And as Darlene said, the tent lots really they're not the most efficient way to work with people financially, but also just in terms of the individuals, right? It's not a secure, it's substandard living conditions, right? We don't consider that true shelter, right? And that's not where we ever want to keep people. And still living in the kind of day-to-day crisis of not being housed, right? And so it was much better for us to ultimately try to transition them into a more stable setting and then continue to stabilize. And the people who we did manage to transition, people who stayed in our longer term, you know, in our more stable, or sorry, our more permanent programs longer, are the ones who got housed. It's very, very hard to house somebody directly out of those circumstances. There was one individual we were able to do that with, but that's really more the exception. And it's because, you know, it's fundamentally so hard to do that work when people are still really in a very insecure situation.
Right, and it was also a really difficult environment for people to live in. They were in a parking lot, not under the trees in the torrential downpours, right? They weren't in the forest with some kind of protection. The rains came, tents blew over, tarps got blown away, people's stuff was wet. That's why we had to implement a laundry program just to keep people's possessions dry so they could have dry clothes. It was just environmentally difficult as well. And then later in the program, at the end, closer to the end of the program, when it was sunny and no longer wet, people had the sun just pouring down on them, and there was nowhere for them to get out of the sun. A question here is, how did we manage to provide security to the people in the tents from coming from the outside? One of the big problems was that we knew early on that there should be a fence around these lots to protect people. We didn't have an opportunity to do that because we were just trying to get tents and trying to get porta potties. And so one of the items that we identified as being something that if we do this again needs to happen is we really need to have fencing around the program. We were told by people inside the program that they really did want the fencing because although we had staff on site, staff wasn't watching every single tent to make sure that somebody from outside wasn't going in at night and causing people to not be safe. So people did feel safe, but it would have been much more comfortable, I think, if we would have had tents around the program, around both lots.
Right, and the barriers is an important thing because otherwise also the program itself becomes very fluid. And, so let's say somebody is really not behaving well with others, right? One of our hard rules, we have lots of soft rules, but our hard rules are aggression or violence. And so if somebody wasn't following some of those rules, or if they were having guests come on site, because that was also, the whole purpose was to be sheltering in place, right? Then somebody might be asked to leave. And it really didn't mean very much if they could just pick up their gear and move right on the other side of the sidewalk.
Right.
Right. That's not much of a, of a barrier there. But when we made the transition to when we pared down to the one site, we were able to put, the city was able to get a barrier up there, and then we were able to consolidate staff to one site. We were able to keep it much safer. Right. People felt much more secure there. Before having the fencing, we had staff going between sites, people would just wait until a staff person was gone to go do something they shouldn't do. So we had clients that were sleeping with their bicycles chained to their feet, to their ankles, so that somebody couldn't take off with their bike, right? And so the more that we did to kind of get those things secure, we could get a bike rack and some things like that. But definitely, having that barrier and consolidating staff so somebody's there all the time on one place made a huge difference.
Right. There's a question, what are the primary lessons learned from the tent lots? Anjali and I recently did a 1-hour presentation on that, so that's something that we're willing to share, but that's a big discussion. I think back to the challenges and opportunities for housing and homeless services during COVID, one of the biggest challenges we saw was that more people were getting let out of the county jails onto the streets. Some people early on were getting evicted from apartments before the moratorium, and there was nowhere for people to go because other people weren't moving. We saw a reduction in the amount of apartments available. We saw a substantial increase in the number of people who were coming to us for service. People who had concerns with not having a place to live, people who had a place to live, but suddenly they lost their job. So they couldn't afford to buy food, or they couldn't afford to get blankets or clothes. People were coming to us for all kinds of needs. And it was just amazing the number of people that were giving us calls. Our food increased substantially. So last year, we provided 62,394 meals to people already this year. And most of them just increased later in the year, the last half of the year. And it still increased because this year, already in the first 2 months of this year, we've already provided over 16,000 meals just in 2 months. So that need isn't going down. It continues to increase. Thanks. Sorry, one of the phones is ringing in our office, so we'll just quiet it down here. Another challenge really was the decrease in shelter beds across the county. We knew that that was a problem. A challenge to reconfigure all of the shelter beds. And as you know, Arcata House Partnership sits on the continuum of care, which is the how we provide service countywide for homeless services. People were even more desperate. People who had never had to call for services before, had never had to thought about how they could find food to feed their families. People who were working class and sometimes working poor suddenly didn't have access to those 2 or 3 jobs. Their child care wasn't there. Schools were shut down. What were people supposed to do? And even more people started to come to us for any kind of support. And I think, Anjali, what your staff saw was the pure panic of just the community, because we don't just serve people who are homeless, we serve people who are hungry. And you don't have to be homeless to be hungry. You can be hungry and still have a place to live, but you could be very vulnerable and worried about where you were going to live. And so Arcata House Partnership, sorry, I'll ask you to fill in, but Arcata House Partnership worked very hard over the last year to help with the eviction moratorium, but not just the moratorium so people could have a free ride, to bring money in that would help to pay landlords or mortgage companies so that people could continue to be housed. And so I think that we've been pretty effective. There's more money coming in. That's a whole different discussion. But working to help people to not panic. And so your staff then had to filter a lot of calls just about this. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of affected services, particularly senior services. So there was a little period there where, you know, Meals on Wheels maybe wasn't as available and wasn't delivering until they could figure out what their safety precautions would be, right? So, you know, very basic things like that. We saw much larger participation in the food pantries across the county, not just here. You know, a lot of people just, you know, not knowing, and particularly when there were so many changes and whether the moratorium was going to end or not, right? People that were very worried about their housing. Again, these were not sort of fringe people, right? These are people, particularly people who are making ends meet on Social Security income or disability income, you know, so at least they were still getting their benefits, but they weren't getting access to a lot of the other things that they were utilizing to sort of make the rest of the ends meet. And so it really affected people at all strata, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so we did our very best to respond. And last year, I'm just taking a look at some numbers here. We served over 2,000 people, but those 2,000 people may have come to us every week, the same person every week, to the food bank or to our food pantry or to our one-stop services to get, you know, support. And so the amount of support that we provided was just substantial. So I see some questions here. How can we make donations? Please go to our website, arcatahouse.org, or feel free to send donations through the mail to our address at 1005 11th Street. Any support that you can provide is always appreciated. How do we coordinate with Food for People to obtain food, or do you? And do you coordinate with other groups such as the Mission? In your ideal world, what kind of facilities would you like to be able to build or provide to meet the growing needs, and is the need likely to lessen? So great question. So we have for years, Arcata House Partnership partnered with Food for People. As some of you know, all of the USDA commodities that come into the county are coordinated through Food for People. We get at 2 locations, actually at 3 locations, we get commodities. We get at our adult shelter, we get USDA commodities. At our one-stop where we have our commercial kitchen, we get USDA commodities. And at the food pantry, which is at Trinity Baptist Church, but we'll soon be moving back to 501 9th Street in Arcata at the beginning of May, we get USDA commodities. In addition, so we work very closely with Food for People. Last year during COVID and still, there was a lot of food money coming into the area. Some of it was coordinated through Food for People. Some of it was coordinated through individual agencies like us or the Mission or Betty. And we all worked together. So when the fishermen called and said, we have 40,000 cans of tuna that we want to donate, then, one of us would pick it up and we'd bring it to our agencies and we would share and we all work together, which was really important. We have a food security program that does gleaning, and last year, although the year before he collected 225,000 pounds of food, last year he collected about 150,000 pounds of food during his regular travels because stores didn't have as much food and restaurants were closed. But in addition to that, hundreds of thousands of pounds of food were collected when restaurants closed, and they called us and we were very grateful for their donations. That it is through community support, pure and simple, that we are able to do what we can do, and that we can serve as many people as we do. But access to food, access to supplies, access to PPE equipment was all very difficult for us. It was hard to get staff to come to work because we had all of these staff issues and people were working from home. We had to silo our program. So the staff in the shelter program only worked in the shelter program and they didn't fill in any other program because we were trying to keep all of our programs separate to protect people from early on the information we knew about COVID. Now all of our staff are vaccinated and that makes a big difference in the way that we can provide service. Challenges though later on in the year were very different than they were earlier in March, April, May, and even June, when we were still so unclear about what was happening. And we were still trying to be really very separate and very isolated. Challenges later became things like, what is some misinformation about vaccinations and what does that mean for people? Housing stock really got reduced. For some of you who have connections to the real estate world, what you might know is that what we're hearing is people from the cities who now can work remotely are coming up here and buying houses for cash above asking price. And so housing stock is really limited. The vacancy rate is almost immeasurable. There's no vacancies in apartments. People aren't moving, right? They're staying where they are because of the moratorium. So in years past, what we would see is that people would be moving around, moving from area to area. Apartments would open up. There were no apartments available. We are paying premium dollars and we still can't get apartments because people are saying to us, if we have one apartment and we can get top dollar, and rents have almost doubled in our area in the last year, why would we ever work with Arcata House Partnership or people with bad rental history when we can get somebody from San Francisco who has no problem paying twice the rent and has a great rental history. So housing stock continues to be a real challenge for us, and finding units that are accessible. A lot of the people that we're serving in our programs have very substantial physical limitations. And so it's even more difficult for us to find accessible units. People, again, we got a lot of people relocating from fires. So even more people were coming into our area who needed additional service. So the amount of people who were coming to us for service just exploded beyond anything that we were ever prepared for. We were working around the clock. We had staff working around the clock, preparing meals and folding tents and doing laundry and counting pillows and whatever we could, so that we were getting ready to house people and to serve people in all of our shelter projects that we had. We're also really concerned that what's happening soon is students are going to be coming back into the area, and so housing, which is already really restricted, is going to get even more difficult. We're still able to get fair amounts of food. We're being very, very fortunate about that. There's a question in the chat. What are USDA commodities? They're grains and canned goods. Yes, shelf-stable milk comes in, dried pasta, canned soups, that kind of stuff. Excuse me, thank you for asking.
I just want to pick up on, somebody was asking about what would an ideal facility look like. I don't think there is one ideal facility. It's about having a range of options for people, because we work with people of many different types of needs, right? You need things like accessible units, things like that. You need some initial sheltering space in order to get people off the street, but we tend to be of the opinion that it's much better to have smaller scattered sites rather than giant facilities. It's always very nice idea to think you're going to put 200 or 300 or 400 people in a big giant facility. Nobody likes living in those, and then you got to run them like prisons. Right? That's not a great way for anybody to live. And so those kinds of places tend to be underutilized. And so, but really, the ideal facility is a home, right? We need housing. The ideal world is we don't need shelters. We get people direct from the street into housing, and we work with them in their home to stabilize. That's the best way to stabilize, but we don't have those options. And so, honestly, the ideal facility is lots of affordable housing. We have lots of voucher money right now, rental assistance money that we can't use because we can't get any units. Right. And so we have all these people that we've been working to stabilize. Where did they go? Right. And so it's a big question. There's a lot to that, but I just wanted to.
Thank you. I think that's really important. Arcata House Partnership is the only agency in the county that provides the full continuum of service, the only nonprofit agency in the county, from street outreach to our one-stop center, referral and connection services, feeding, shelter, family shelter, and adult shelter, into permanent housing. We have permanent housing, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing funds. We manage those funds. We are the only agency the only nonprofit agency in the county to manage permanent supportive housing funds, and we're grateful for that honor. We have applied for and received home key funds, so we will soon be opening our first prop facility that we own. It'll be 17 units of affordable housing. And why does that make a difference for us? If you as a homeowner have an application from somebody coming out of San Francisco who's got this huge bank account and lots of money and a great rental history, or you have Arcata House Partnership who's got a client that has bad rental history, maybe they have a history of substance use, maybe they have a mental health concern, maybe they have a criminal record, and it's your apartment and you have to protect it, which one do you think you're going to choose? And so if we own small affordable housing projects, like the 17-unit one that will be opening soon, we get to put people in there who we believe can succeed. We believe even if they can't succeed, we're going to try our hardest to help them succeed. We know they're coming with challenges because we know them. We are going to work really hard to help them in that housing unit because we believe that everybody deserves an opportunity to be housed. That's who we are. Some people ask me, why don't we open a tent program like a tiny house village? And my answer to that is really simple. A tiny house village, the way some people refer to it as, with, you know, a unit that's a bed and some heat and some power with a congregate kitchen. Those aren't tiny houses in my opinion. Tiny houses have, everybody's got a bathroom and a kitchen and heat, and we would certainly manage that kind of tiny house program if people had their own space. But we at Arcata House Partnership are not interested in managing long-term a tent lot or kind of a detached building project. Other agencies in the county are. AHA, Affordable Housing and Homeless, whatever their last one is, AHA, is very interested in doing that. There are lots of agencies throughout the county that are interested in providing other services. And so we partner with lots of people. We don't have doctors on staff, so we don't provide medical care. We don't have mental health clinicians on staff. We don't provide mental health clinicians, mental health, that kind of counseling. We don't provide 10 detached bedroom support. Other people do. And I think it's important for me to say that what Arcata House Partnership does is we have people move from being on the streets to being housed, and we do it very effectively. I think 97% of our people last year who we placed in permanent housing retained housing even through COVID. We do that well. And that's important to us. And we work with other agencies who do what they do well. Thank you, Erin, for a little clap there. I appreciate that.
And just to add on that, so even though we don't provide a lot of those services as an agency, meaning we don't have counselors on our staff, we don't have mental health clinicians on our staff, we connect them to that. So that's part of the whole picture. The roof is just the starting place, right? But we're going to work with people to identify what the need is and then pull in the related services that are necessary to help them succeed.
Absolutely. And again, we partner with about 220 agencies. Adult Protective Services and PACE and Senior Resource Center and Food for People and Open Door and St. Joe's and Mad River and
Animal health.
Yeah, and child services and the high schools and the colleges, and we do that because we are really good at what we do and they're really good at what they do, and we work together to help people meet their needs. Yeah, I want to spend some time talking about opportunities because that's really important. What we've learned over the last year is that, holy cow, our world can be turned upside down, but there are so many people who are committed to serving our county and our community that my heart is warmed by this. Our staff came in every day to serve. Our clients look to us every day so that, our clients look to us every day so that we could be there for them, and they believed in us. Our community showed us amazing support through this program because they believed in us. And so I want to spend a few minutes to talk about opportunities to move forward. Go ahead.
Right. Well, one of the big things that we've seen through COVID is that homelessness is no longer a fringe issue, right? Many people are now facing housing insecurity. And it's really elevated the discussion at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level. Homelessness and housing insecurity is now considered a national crisis, right? And that matters, one, because it's really changing the dialogue around homelessness and what the solutions might look like and what supports need to be. But it means that there's dollars getting committed that weren't committed before. And so one, changing the face of the homelessness, as Darlene often likes to talk about, is crucial because people are no longer seeing it as just, you know, the crazy guy on the corner, right? It never really was that. I mean, sure, there's an element, right? But homelessness has, you know, people who are facing housing insecurity have always been our neighbors. But now it's more real for more of us. And so, like I said, with that comes not just discussion, or maybe even, you know, that it's not such a icky issue for so many people, right? But that it's also, as I said earlier, attaching dollars to it, which means there's more money than we've ever seen coming through for homeless assistance. I wish it didn't take this to get that, but guess what? We got it now, right? And so, you know, the irony, like we were just talking about, is there's now so much more assistance in funding coming available, but we have nowhere to put any money.
Right.
And that takes a long time to get up to capacity, right? We know we've got, I mean, just in our official homeless, you know, our point in time counts from before COVID, we know that there was at least 1,500 people on the street, and that's always a low estimate. You could probably double it and not be wrong.
Right.
But now with COVID, we know that that's, you know, that's a bigger issue. Again, many people have been safe because of the moratoriums, but we don't know how long that will last. And so, you know, even if we got 300 units to come online, right, that's still only going to make a tiny dent. And one of the biggest things that we've seen, and this is again pre-COVID, one of our fastest growing homeless population are people who are seniors, people who became homeless after age 55 or 60. We're seeing people who are homeless first time in their 80s.
Yes.
Right? What on earth are they going to do? They're not prepared for that situation. So people are entering the street with far less capacity to address the situation they're facing. They're far more vulnerable. And so that is a national concern. That's not just a local concern. And so, you know, that's one of the key discussions now is what are we going to do with all these people who are in the hotels safely right now, or potentially, I mean, Darlene mentioned diversion funds for people who are already in their homes but at risk of losing it. So there's a lot of funding coming down the line to try to help those people stay in their homes. But, you know, for the first time ever, we're really hearing this sort of huge dialogue around what do we do.
Right, and a national dialogue, and a statewide dialogue, and a local dialogue. We are seeing, for the first time, City of Arcata willing to try new things, like allow us to serve in their parking lots for a few months while we're experimenting with that tent lot. We are going to be opening a family shelter on the tribal land soon. Because the need there is just so expansive. It's everywhere. We could fill our shelters 3 or 4 times over right now with the number of people who are on our list. Our priority lists stop at 350 people because why have more people than that on the list? We can't possibly serve that many people that quickly. If we think about, and this is really all about changing the way people look at people who are in need. If people in this little chat think about Do you know anyone who is living in a subsidized apartment who gets a Section 8 voucher or who gets a voucher from any other organization to help pay the rent? Or senior housing, right? Senior housing is subsidized housing. The one over near the co-op, what is that called?
Plaza Point.
Plaza Point, subsidized housing, right? If you think about the number of people you know who are already getting support and assistance through any of those programs, you would be amazed. And now think about, we're doing the same thing, but not just for seniors, but for people who are economically disadvantaged, right? Everybody who gets some kind of support gets that support because they're in need financially, or they get meals from senior meals because they're in need, because they can't make their own dinners, or all of those services are the same thing we provide. We just do it for people who don't currently have a place to live. And if somebody on this call tomorrow finds out that they don't have a place to live, that they're getting evicted, that they're in a trailer park, and the rent from the trailer park, because there's a new owner, just went up astronomically, I hope that your first call is going to be to us, or to Humboldt Senior Resource Center, or to other agencies, because there are hundreds of agencies, excuse me, in our county that are really committed to serving people in need. And what I hope that we walk away with here is that, at least at Arcata House Partnership, we pride ourselves on not being judgmental. If somebody comes to us and they need help, we're going to do our best to help them, whether they're homeless, whether they have a mental health concern that's not being addressed, whether they have a physical disability so they can't find accessible housing, whether they're a senior over 80 who for the first time has to worry about becoming homeless, whether they don't know how they're going to find food for tomorrow, or whether it's time for them to go back to work because buildings and agencies are opening up, and what are they going to do about childcare? All of those issues are things that we deal with all day. Sorry, I get so passionate about what we do. And then I'm just like, let me tell you everything, and then I need a drink. So there's questions. What are the provisions, if any, for building more affordable housing in Arcata to meet your needs? Is there funding currently or projected to be available in addition to the new 17 units, and how far ahead do you have to plan? Wow. So yes, maybe, and we'll talk. No, I'm kidding. So here's really where it is. Danco is building a new project over behind the co-op. And Yurok Indian Housing Authority is building a project on M Street. So that's a family project. The other one is, I think, a senior project. Those are, so do you know of any other ones?
Well, I mean, there's a Samoa project.
Sure, the Danco Samoa project, which is 80 family units, I think.
And then the one that just got finished, the Bayview.
In Eureka, the ones in Eureka, Bayview.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
50 units there.
So that's for people with mental health issues or veterans. Mm-hmm. Our 17-unit project is in Eureka. We also know the Humboldt Inn will soon be 50 units for people who are currently homeless, and that'll be run by Providence St. Joe's for people that they serve. I'm not hearing of anything else in particular. There is an opportunity to do a Home Key 2 project. We are looking around to see if there's a motel conversion that we might be able to purchase. We're looking at one which is 50 units that's larger than we really want to look at. There's a smaller project that I'd like to consider, and we're just starting the discussion with the owner on that one. So we know there's some Home Key 2 funds coming. Here's the thing about development. Normally, to develop affordable housing, it can take 10 years from thought to completion, because the amount of funding that has to be stacked is astronomical. What the governor did with the Home Key funds is he said, here's money, but you only have 4 or 5 months to do it in. And we're like, what? And so we took the challenge and we said, okay, let's do that. If that's the only way that we can get money in right now, then we're going to take that challenge. And so we did. And so our project is almost complete. We're a little bit over schedule, but that's okay. It hasn't taken 10 years. We just started in October, and we should be ready to occupy May 1st. That's what we're hoping for. So what happened with those funds? Yeah, that's a big one, right? Yeah. Some of you know, you're like, yeah, Darlene, we get it. What happened there is the governor said to all of the counties, make it happen. Get the zoning restrictions out of the way. Get any use restrictions out of the way. Make it happen so that we can get some affordable housing units. And it worked. And it worked statewide. Thousands of units are coming online statewide because of this program that the governor put in place. Now, with that, Arcata House Partnership provides supportive housing. So that means on the operating side, we know that it's very important to provide support for clients and tenants as they're moving from homelessness to being housed. And we want to help people make that transition. Yes, RCHDC is doing a building over in Pine Hill and Eureka. Yes, thank you, Kay. So now the challenge for us is, how do we find supportive opportunities on the occupancy side? Well, Arcata House Partnership can do that because we have emergency solutions grant funds and rapid rehousing funds. And so we have a way to do that. Whereas a lot of other organizations across the state are saying to us, they're trying to figure out how to do that. Now, the Housing Authority is also working very closely with us, and they are allowing us to talk to them about putting some long-term supports, their project-based Section 8 vouchers in some of our projects. So there are so many people involved in these discussions that it is just thrilling for me that people are coming together in ways to do this. Problems, though, we still don't have places to build. Arcata doesn't have vacant land. There's not a lot of places to go. There's a lot of land that's used for agriculture or for the cows or for other things, but there's not places for us to build. So even if we brought in more money to build, there aren't places to do that. And that becomes an additional kind of hurdle that we're still working to try and overcome. So there's a lot of information, and I'm really glad that people are having these questions. Are there questions that people have particularly of us?
There's one there that we haven't addressed. Are we still getting an influx of the needy from other jurisdictions? So the reality is the homeless population is not static. So we have people leaving, people coming all the time, people who were from here, go out of the area for a while, come back, right? Or we have a lot of people that we offer TAP assistance, that's transportation program assistance, because sometimes people just need to get across the country to reunify with someone, right? We can do that. So it's really, it's whether somebody's homeless in Arcata or McKinleyville or Southern Humboldt or Mendocino or Oregon, right? It's a very fluid population. And so, you know, it's honestly, it's a lot of coming and going.
One of the questions that we're asked often is, are these our homeless people? And generally the answer is yes. We're getting a lot of influx out of the area for people coming in who are renting units, a lot of influx from people coming out of the area who are renting hotel rooms because of the fires. We aren't seeing I mean, although we've seen a huge amount of people coming in, and we are seeing people from other areas, for the most part, our homeless population, the people, the 2,000 people that we work with regularly, they're ours. They're people that have lived in Arcata for years. For the most part, I think like well into the 90% range are people that have lived in Arcata for years, either on the street or they've been housed or in and out of housing. And Arcata, Eureka, McKinleyville, right, the area, because again, people move. But for the most part, the people we're seeing from other areas who are coming in needing service, maybe they're just passing through and they're here and they need some food quickly or some gas money to move on. And I want to be really sensitive because I get asked that question a lot. Are they ours? Well, the first day that I lived in Arcata, I was now ours, right? So it's really interesting that people are thinking of people who are homeless, even though they're here for 1 day or 1 week or 1 year, as not being ours. And I don't think that anybody would have said to me, Darlene, you've lived in Arcata now for a week. Are you an Arcadan now? Right? And so I think it's all about how we look at people who are homeless. Let's see, are the property management companies helpful in assisting you in finding units? Well, we work with property management companies sometimes, but there's no units. Vacancy rate is well under 2% right now, I'm being told. That means there's no units, right? I mean, for the 1 or 2 units that we do have access to or we do get to see, they don't meet housing quality standards. They're very poor substandard quality. If they are not substandard quality, they're snatched up in minutes from people who can pay twice the rent or even offer incentives.
There's a question here about CDC changing precautions around transmission from surface contact, and will that have an impact on functions like showering facilities? So one of the big things that we haven't really talked about is vaccinations. So our staff are vaccinated right now, so that's certainly opened up some of the things that we can do. We also worked with Open Door recently to roll out the very first Johnson & Johnson doses in the county to people who are homeless. And the reason that Johnson & Johnson is favored is because it's a single dose, because getting a hold of people and to stick a needle in their arm even one time is really tough, much less to do it a second time where you gotta locate them, make sure they get back in time. Maybe they got arrested, maybe they moved somewhere else, they lost their phone, who knows what, they lost their card, they don't remember when their next appointment was. It's very, very challenging with a homeless population to get that second dose. So we're really excited about that. There's a potential to get more doses here at the end of the month, but we're not sure yet. So that's a big, we originally thought that was going to be the big game changer, because then we could say, all right, now that everybody's vaccinated, let's open up the shelters, let's this and that. Well, it turns out there's also a lot of barriers to getting people vaccinated, apart from just accessing the vaccines. There's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people are very scared of the vaccines. You know, there's a really huge public health education effort that needs to happen. And that's not just for people who are homeless, that's really everyone. But so vaccines would certainly, you know, be a game changer in what we could do. But the contact surfaces, I don't know that we've really gotten a rollout plan yet for that in terms of how it will affect our services directly.
Right.
But
Public Health is working with the CDC right now to talk about what changes might be coming our way for shelters and the way that we can manage our shelters and our one-stop services. I don't know what that means. We always hope that we're going to be able to open our one-stop services again for showers. Right now, we are working with AHA to talk about whether they can bring their showers to Valley West. Our new location, part of our admin office, is now in Valley West, 4677 Valley West Boulevard, and we're so grateful for that. We are now starting to open things up a little bit. We're starting to look for more volunteers. If anyone is interested in coordinating our food program, I'd love to talk to someone, because that's certainly something that we're really going to be spending a lot of time on, really enhancing our food program so that we can do that. We're changing item donation procedure so that once a quarter we're going to be having a donation day. It's just been really difficult for us to kind of stay on top of that when people are just bringing things, and we really appreciate everything that people bring, but we'll be changing a little bit. At one point we could not donate excess food to the shelter from our gardens. Can we do that now? So the answer is yes, Debbie, you can, but what we're doing is we're taking it, our gleaner, Joe, and I think, Debbie, you know, I certainly know, Phil knows Joe, who's been around a long time, can access food. And now that our pantry, the Arcata Food Pantry, will be coming to our location on Wednesdays, so Monday and Tuesdays will be great times to let us know that you have excess food that you want to donate so that we can have it available. We are serving about 85 people a week in our food pantry, and we could serve more, but our shelves are empty by the end of the day. So if you're interested in doing some volunteer work at the,
we do need pantry volunteers.
We do need pantry volunteers, and we need food volunteers to kind of maybe look at our food program and be responsible for that. We're not taking volunteers right now in our shelters, although people are cooking for our shelters. So if you're one of those agencies who cooks for our shelters once a week or once a month, then please continue to do that, or to call, and we can set you up if you want to be on that.
Could use volunteers as well.
Some volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering, call. What number should we have them call?
I think I'm it for now.
How about email Angelee at abrowning, BROWNING, at arcatahouse.org, and she will, or she or someone that she works with will contact you and talk about some of the volunteer opportunities that are coming open. We are still not taking a lot of people to volunteer. We are hoping that our volunteers have been vaccinated, although I'm told that we can't ask that question because it's a private medical question. So we don't ask those questions, but we are certainly hoping, if you know people who have been vaccinated and have some time that they'd like to donate, then please contact us. Wow, so it's 1:19. Other questions for us? I can't imagine that I didn't overwhelm you.
Yes, I asked if you could write an article for the Times Standard and/or the Mad River Union outlining some of your needs and ways to assist you, so it's available to everyone in writing.
That's an excellent suggestion, Jane, and yes, we will do that. Thank you.
Any other questions, or have we worn everybody out?
Did I make your head explode? I don't know. I didn't mean to. What I meant to say in all of this is that we have been so fortunate to be able to serve our community in ways that we never expected to be able to do. And we couldn't do that without the support of all of you, without the support of the businesses and our local politicians. And so thank you from the bottom of our hearts, we are all here to serve. We appreciate your support.
Well, Darlene and Angelique, we appreciate everything you're doing. We think you guys are wonderful, and it's so nice to hear all the great things you're doing. And I hope you're able to continue this work with the same amount or even more support, and that people feel comfortable coming back and volunteering, and you can accept those volunteers.
Thank you.